So our next unit is on body systems, and we're going to be focused on how the body systems really interact with one another. The expectation is that you have some background knowledge of the organs that are in the various systems and the basic functions of the various systems. So we will be, like I said, focused a lot more on how they actually interact with one another. And so today's focus is going to be on absorption and distribution of nutrients. So let's backtrack a little bit to cellular respiration. Hopefully you guys remember this from our first 6 weeks in our talks then. And so if y'all remember, this right here is glucose. Okay, and so C6H12O6. And right here we have oxygen. And all of our cells need these. And they need them, remember, to make our energy. In particular, remember our ATP. And so if you think about, we're going to apply this, like I said, we're talking about body systems, so we're applying this to our bodies. Our bodies have trillions of cells in them. Every single cell in your body needs to be making ATP, which means every single cell in your body needs glucose and it needs oxygen. Okay? Most of us know that the oxygen gets into our body through our lungs, but you've got cells down in your toes that need oxygen. How is it going to get there? Okay? Same with the glucose. Glucose is going to come in based on the food we eat. So it's going to come through our mouth and end up in our stomach and our intestines. How is it going to get to the places we need? For example, your brain needs 6 to 8 times the glucose of the other cells in your body. How does that glucose get from your brain, from your intestines up to your brain? Okay, so we're going to focus on that. So we're going to be focused today on digestive, respiratory, and circulatory systems. Okay, the main ones that will bring these nutrients into the body as well as then help distribute them throughout the body. Okay, so our basic, we've got our respiratory system here on the left, lungs, trachea, okay, breathing the air in and out. Digestive here in the middle. Remember, mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, liver, gallbladder, and then our circulatory system here on the right, consisting of our blood vessels, our heart, and we're going to be talking about each one of these as we go through them. Okay, but we've got to get these nutrients into our cells so that our whole body can actually function. So we're going to focus on the respiratory system first. So we're going to focus on getting that oxygen into our body as well as getting that carbon dioxide out of the body. Okay? Even, as we talked on the first bit, that we need these nutrients in the cells, but as those cells use those nutrients, they also produce waste. And these systems, respiratory, circulatory, digestive, they're also going to help get rid of the waste and remove it from the cells. So hopefully you remember some of your main organs from your respiratory system. Okay, so we've got the trachea here, the tube that leads from the mouth and the nose. Okay, that trachea will split into the bronchi. Okay, so bronchus is 1, bronchi is 2. So we go so the air flows down through the trachea, splits into the right and left bronchi, into the lungs themselves. Okay, so there's our lungs. Okay, and then from there, our respiratory system is done. That oxygen needs to get into the circulatory system to be able to be moved throughout the body. So let's talk for a second about how this respiratory system is going to actually bring the air in and out of the body. Okay, so the actual movement of the air, bringing the air in and out of the body, is called ventilation. Okay, and so ventilation has nothing to do with getting the oxygen into the circulatory system or getting this carbon dioxide out of the blood. It's just moving the air in and out from the lungs out to the surrounding air, and then taking that big breath in from the surrounding air and taking it into our lungs. And the main organ that's going to help us do that is going to be the diaphragm. Okay, the diaphragm is a skeletal muscle. Okay, and so the diaphragm, you'll notice right now, it's kind of arched up like this. And when we take a big deep breath in, that diaphragm actually comes down like this. It flattens out and comes down. And so you'll notice what we've done now is we have expanded all this space here. We basically made more room for these lungs to get bigger so that they can take in more air. Okay, if y'all remember your pressure volume things, when I increase volume, okay, I'm going to decrease pressure. So if I have decreased when I increase my volume inside of the thoracic cavity, okay, I decrease the pressure. So now the pressure on the outside, okay, in the outside atmosphere is larger than the pressure on the inside, and so it forces air inside. Okay? And the opposite will be true for when we breathe out. So when we breathe out, that diaphragm goes back to its original shape. Okay? So when that diaphragm drops back to its original shape, okay, it's going to go back to this arch here. It's going to actually decrease the volume. And so if it decreases the volume, that's going to actually increase the pressure, and so it will then push air out of the lungs. So that ventilation process is largely based on the diaphragm here. So that's going to be an example of where this respiratory system is going to interact with another system. Okay, it's going to interact with the muscular system. Okay, so during ventilation, the respiratory system interacts with the muscular system. It also will interact a little bit with the skeletal system as well. Okay, as many of you know, you can see the edges of them right here. Your ribs, your lungs, are surrounded by your ribs. And so for your lungs to be able to expand, your rib cage needs to open up a little bit. If you sit right now for just a second and you take a big deep breath, you will feel that rib cage expand out. So the muscular and the skeletal system have to work together with the respiratory system for it to be able to bring air in and out of the body. So the lungs are the primary organ of the respiratory system, and as the air moves into the lungs, it moves into smaller and smaller areas, okay, and eventually ends up into these little air sacs. They look like little clusters of grapes, and they're called alveoli. Alveoli are the main part of the lung. This is where the gas exchange actually takes place with your body. We went through all that work to ventilate the body, to bring the air in and out, okay, but we didn't actually get any into the bloodstream. And if none of it gets into the bloodstream, then it's not going to go to all the cells. Remember, that's why we have to breathe. We have to breathe so that all of our cells can get oxygen so they can make ATP. So what we have with these alveoli is the alveoli are going to be surrounded by all these little tiny blood vessels. You can see them here, okay? These little tiny blood vessels that are called capillaries. And the alveoli, the walls of the alveoli and the walls of the capillaries are very, very thin. And because they are so thin, you've got the alveoli wall and the thin capillary wall, diffusion can easily take place back and forth across them. You don't have a big, large membrane on each side that things are trying to diffuse across. You have these very thin walls of the capillaries and the alveoli. So when you take a big, deep breath in, there is a higher concentration of oxygen inside the alveoli than there is inside of the blood. So I've taken that big, deep breath in now, okay, and so this is the alveoli side, and this is the capillary side. So I've taken this big deep breath in. I've got lots of oxygen on this side, okay? Lots of CO2 on this side in the capillaries because I'm bringing that waste product back. Okay? If you'll remember back to diffusion, things like to flow from a high to a low concentration. So if I've taken this big deep breath in and I have lots and lots of oxygen, the oxygen is naturally going to want to go that way across into the capillary, into the bloodstream. And so now it can be taken wherever it needs to go throughout the body. Okay, the capillary has lots of CO2 in it from the waste products of the cells. Remember, the cellular respiration is glucose plus oxygen will give us carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So all those cells that are using the oxygen to make ATP, they're also producing CO2. So that CO2 needs to somehow get back to the lungs so that we can blow it out of our body. And so the capillaries have a large amount of CO2 in them. So again, based on diffusion, how things like to go naturally from a high to a low concentration, that CO2 goes across the capillary back into the alveoli. So now we can take that, blow that big breath out and get rid of that CO2. And so when that gas exchange occurs, when the O2 goes into the capillaries and the CO2 goes into the alveoli and we blow it off, that would be an interaction that the respiratory system is going to have with the excretory system. Remember, when we excrete things, we are getting them out. Okay, and so when we actually breathe out, we are excreting CO2. So our respiratory system right now is interacting with our skeletal, our muscular system, our circulatory system to be able to transport this oxygen and carbon dioxide, as well as the excretory system to be able to remove it from the body. Now, once this oxygen enters the capillaries, it's going to bind to the red blood cells. And the red blood cells contain what's called hemoglobin. And the hemoglobin is a protein that is attracted to the oxygen. Hemoglobin has iron in it. It's the heme there is iron. And that iron and the oxygen have an attraction to one another. And so when that oxygen enters the bloodstream, it'll bind to these red blood cells. So the oxygen will get picked up by those red blood cells, and now it can travel wherever it needs to go throughout the body and be delivered to the various cells. So we've got one of the nutrients for cellular respiration into the body. We got that oxygen in through the lungs. It diffused from the alveoli into the capillary, so it's headed off to the cells. Well, now we need to get the glucose in there and the various other nutrients that we need. In addition to just glucose, this is just the example we've been using, we need a wide variety of other nutrients in our body. Think back to organic compounds. Okay? The organic compounds, remember, are carbohydrates, our lipids, our proteins, our nucleic acids. Our cells need all of those things. They need to make carbohydrates. Okay? They need to make proteins. They need to make lipids. And they need to make nucleic acids. You know, we've got to be able to make DNA and RNA. Okay? And the only way they're going to make those is they need the monomers. Okay? For proteins, we need some amino acids. For carbohydrates, we need some glucose. For lipids, we need fatty acids and glycerol and phosphates. And for nucleic acids, we need sugars and phosphates and nitrogen bases. And there's no way that our body makes those from scratch. Okay? We have to get them from somewhere. And they come from our food. That's why we eat. Okay? We take in nutrients so that we can make new phospholipids for our cell membranes, so that we can make new proteins for our enzymes. Okay? That's why our body actually needs to eat, so that we can get these nutrients. And so the digestive system is going to help us break the food down that we take in so that we can really release these nutrients. Okay, so if y'all remember some of your organs from your digestive system, obviously the food starts up here with the mouth, okay, and then it will travel down the esophagus, okay, into the stomach. So down into the stomach. From the stomach, it'll go into the small intestine. Okay, from the small intestine, it will then move into the large intestine. Okay, large intestine is also called the colon. Okay, it'll move through the large intestine then and out through the rectum. And you have these various other organs here. Okay, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, the salivary glands. These are all accessory organs. They help with digestion. They produce enzymes that help break down the food. Liver and the gallbladder produce the bile that helps break down the fats. But the food doesn't actually pass through these organs. So they're not technically part of the digestive tract. So we have two basic kinds of digestion. We have what's called chemical digestion versus physical digestion. Okay, so chemical digestion is going to be taking the enzymes and actually breaking the food into the monomers. Okay, so with chemical digestion, we're going to use enzymes. For example, the enzymes in your saliva, amylase. They start breaking down carbohydrates as soon as they enter your body. Okay? The enzymes in your stomach start breaking down the proteins. So the enzymes that are going to break the food down, break down food into the monomers. So this is what's going to release the amino acids. This is what's going to release the nucleotides. This is what's going to release the monosaccharides for carbohydrates. We're going to break the bonds between the food that we ate to release its monomers. For example, if you ate a big giant steak, you ate a whole bunch of proteins, but those proteins aren't going to help you. What you need are the amino acids that those proteins are made of. And so the chemical digestion will break all those peptide bonds and release those amino acids so that now you can use those amino acids to form the proteins that you need. Okay? The physical digestion, which is really just physically breaking the food into smaller pieces. It's also called mechanical digestion. I can spell mechanical. Let's just erase and start over. Okay, so it's also called mechanical digestion, and this is, like I said, just the physical breakdown of the food. Okay, we are breaking the food down into smaller pieces so that those enzymes can get into those bonds and really break them apart. So we're just breaking the food down into smaller physical pieces. This would be when you chew your food. Okay, this would be when your stomach starts mixing the food up into smaller parts. Okay, and then once this food is broken down, it can be moved throughout the digestive system and you can absorb it. So the food will move through the digestive system via peristalsis. Okay, so peristalsis is these rhythmic muscular contractions that will, for instance, this portion of the intestine will contract and that will push the food a little forward, a little further. Then this portion will contract and it will push it farther. And this portion and it will push it farther. So that peristalsis is an interaction with the muscular system. Okay? So now I've got this digestive system that is interacting with the muscular system. It's also, in just a second, you'll see how it's going to interact with the cardiovascular, the circulatory system as well. So the peristalsis is moving the food through the digestive tract. And as that food gets into the intestines, in particular the small intestine, the majority of the digestion has taken place. And now it's time for the absorption part of the digestive system. This is really the most important. And in this absorption phase is where the food that is in the intestines there actually gets absorbed into the circulatory system. So it gets absorbed through the cells that are in that line the intestinal tract into the circulatory system. So now we have an interaction with the circulatory system because now we have this glucose, the amino acids, all of those monomers now are in the circulatory system and can be transported to the various cells so that the cells can use them. So from the small intestine, the peristalsis will continue to push the food into the large intestine or the colon. And so from the large intestine or the colon, the food will continue to move through until it leaves the anus. Now, in the large intestine, there's no more chemical digestion taking place. In the large intestine, we're also not absorbing any nutrients here, not food nutrients. The large intestine will help absorb water and salts. That's why the large intestine essentially produces solid waste, because it's removed the water from the food there. So the large intestine reabsorbs the water, it reabsorbs the salts. Obviously, it's going to produce the solid waste. And the large intestine will also help us produce some vitamins, in particular vitamin K. And forms of vitamin B can be produced in the large intestine. And those are mostly byproducts of the bacteria that we have in our intestines. All bacteria are not bad. In this particular case, bacteria are very good. We need to have bacteria in our intestines. They help us break down certain kinds of food that without them we would not be able to break down. It's a mutualistic relationship. If y'all remember that from middle school, remember both parties are benefiting here. The bacteria get food, they get somewhere to live, we get help breaking down our food. So even though we're not chemically digesting any more food, we're still absorbing this water and these salts, and those are going to go, just like everything else that we've absorbed, those are going to go into the circulatory system. So we're continuing to interact with the circulatory system to be able to distribute and deliver these nutrients. So the circulatory system, the one that's been transporting these things everywhere, its main components are going to be the heart, the blood vessels, in particular, arteries, veins, capillaries. We'll look at those in just a minute, as well as the blood itself. So we've got the heart, blood vessels, and blood vessels. Blood and blood vessels. And so the circulatory system, as I'm sure you've hopefully picked up on by now, it's going to transport oxygen and nutrients, and it's going to remove waste. It's going to help get waste to the areas that it needs to be removed. So, like I said, the circulatory system is going to contain the heart, and so the heart is made of cardiac muscle, and So there's a picture of your heart there, and your cardiac muscle, which is under involuntary control, so we cannot control this cardiac muscle. Okay, and the heart is what's going to actually help pump the blood. Okay, the heart is just a pump, okay, and it pushes the blood to the various parts of the body. Okay, but it's a time, again, where the circulatory system is interacting with another system, in particular here the muscular system, because the heart is made up of cardiac muscle. In addition to the heart, the circulatory system contains 3 basic types of vessels. Okay, so I've got the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. Okay, so arteries, you may have been taught oxygenated blood versus deoxygenated blood. That's not true. Okay, arteries, they take blood away from the heart. It doesn't matter if it has oxygen or not. Okay, and veins are going to take blood to the heart. Again, it doesn't matter if it has oxygen or not. So arteries transport blood away from the heart. Okay? Veins will take blood back to the heart. The capillaries is where the exchange is going to actually happen. And so this is where the actual exchange of nutrients, the exchange of waste products are going to happen, is in these capillary vessels. If you'll look at them structurally, you'll see how these arteries have big, thick walls. Same with the veins, but the capillaries have these very, very thin walls here, very easy for diffusion to occur back and forth. And you'll see the capillaries are what connect the arteries to the veins. So blood flows away from the heart, okay, out to the tissues, whether it's lung tissue, liver tissue, muscle tissue, whatever. It flows away from the heart out to the tissues. Diffusion of whatever needs to happen will happen at the capillary level, and then now the blood will go back to the heart to be pumped through the body again. So traveling throughout these arteries and veins and capillaries is we have the actual blood. And blood is made up of parts, what are called the formed elements, or basically the cells. Okay, so the formed elements and the plasma. And the plasma is just the liquidy part of the blood. The plasma is the water-based liquid part that'll carry various ions and things like that. What we're focused on right now is the actual formed elements, the blood cells. And so the formed elements, the blood cells, these are made in the bone marrow. Okay, and so they're made in the bone marrow by a process called hematopoiesis. Okay, so hematopoiesis is we're forming these new blood cells in the bone marrow. So if these blood cells are being made in the bone marrow, now we've got another interaction. Okay, now we've got the circulatory system here working with the skeletal system. So all these systems in our body work together. None of them really can function independently. Okay, they just wouldn't be successful. So we've got 3 basic types of cells or formed elements in our body. Let's start with this one here. Okay, this one is your red blood cell. And as we mentioned before, you can see right here, this is your erythrocyte, okay, which is also, again, your red blood cell. So your red blood cells are going to contain hemoglobin. If you remember, they contain hemoglobin. And that hemoglobin helps to transport the oxygen. So these red blood cells travel throughout the circulatory system, okay, and as they pass by the lungs and the oxygen is diffusing into the capillaries, they will pick up the oxygen. It will be attracted to the hemoglobin, and then as they travel to the various tissues, the oxygen will diffuse from the hemoglobin out into the tissues. So we've got this interaction now, again, with the respiratory system. So in addition to our red blood cells, we have what are called the white blood cells. White blood cells are also called leukocytes. Okay, so all of these here, as well as these, okay, are also forms of leukocytes, which again is these white blood cells. These are a little bit larger. They are not as prominent. We don't have nearly as many of them. Okay, when you're looking at, if y'all remember from looking under the microscope the other day in class, you had lots and lots of little tiny little red blood cells and the occasional larger leukocyte or white blood cell. Now, if there's some kind of attack that they need to fend off, some bacterial infection, then they will increase in numbers. And so these white blood cells deal with immune function. So we've got another system interaction here of the circulatory system working with the immune system to help transport these immune cells where they need to be to help clean up your body. And the last cell type we have here is the platelet cells. So it's these little ones here. They're technically not even a real cell. They're fragments of a cell. And so you can see your little platelets here, significantly smaller than the others. Platelets are involved with blood clotting. So if there's any form of damage to the tissue or anything, the platelets will basically flock to the area and seal it off. Platelets are what help form a scab when you've got an injury. So platelets are responsible for stopping blood flow when there's been damage to the vessel. Okay, and they're responsible for blood clotting. So hopefully you've been able to see as we've worked through these three systems here how the various systems interact with one another and how they're able to interact with one another to ensure that we can get the proper nutrients that we need, oxygen, glucose, monomers, whatever it is that we need, and distribute it to all the trillions of cells that we have in our bodies.